The wedding hall buzzed with laughter and celebration, until a piercing voice cut through the air. "Stop right there," the groom shouted, pointing at the sharply dressed black man near the buffet. "Check his pockets. Something's missing." Gasps filled the room as all eyes turned to the accused, who stood calm and unshaken. Little did anyone know, the man they were humiliating wasn't just any guest. He was about to change the groom's life forever. Before we jump into today's story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. If you love powerful stories of justice, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, so you never miss what's coming next. Now, let's get started. "You've got the wrong man," the accused finally spoke, his deep, commanding voice silencing the murmurs around him. His name was Malcolm King, a name that carried weight in circles far beyond this petty wedding drama, though no one here seemed to recognize him. Dressed in a tailored suit and an understated watch worth more than most people's cars, Malcolm had an air of quiet confidence, not arrogance. But tonight he wasn't here as a tycoon. He was just a guest, a +1 accompanying a colleague, and he had planned to keep it that way. As the groom glared at him, Malcolm's gaze shifted, taking in the room full of stunned faces, some whispering, some accusing. For Malcolm, this wasn't the first time he'd been underestimated, but something about the venom in the groom's tone told him this wouldn't be as easy to brush off. The groom smirked, stepping closer. "So, what's your excuse, Mr. Mystery Man? You don't belong here, and everyone knows it." Malcolm's jaw tightened, but his expression didn't falter. The real game had just begun. "You think a suit can hide what you are?" The groom sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. He turned to the crowd, gesturing dramatically. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's not act like we don't see what's happening here. First, a missing wallet. Now this man lurking around uninvited." The murmurs turned sharper, eyes narrowing at Malcolm, who remained stone-faced. "Security!" the groom barked. Two men in matching uniforms approached, looking uneasy but obedient. "Search him," the groom ordered, a smug grin spreading across his face. Malcolm raised his hand slightly, not in surrender but in a quiet display of control. "You're making a mistake," Malcolm said calmly, his voice cutting through the growing tension. But his words fell on deaf ears. One of the guards hesitated, looking at the groom, then at Malcolm. "Sir, maybe we should—" "Do it," the groom snapped, cutting him off. The guard sighed and patted Malcolm down, his hands trembling. When nothing was found, the groom's face darkened. "Check his bag," he demanded, pointing to Malcolm's briefcase resting on a nearby chair. The guard reluctantly grabbed the bag, opening it under the scrutinizing gaze of the crowd. Inside were documents, neatly arranged, contracts, blueprints, and a sleek leather notebook embossed with Malcolm's initials. No wallet, no stolen items. "Explain this," the groom yelled, grabbing one of the papers. His eyes scanned the words, his smirk faltering slightly as he read them. But before anyone could question it, the groom turned back to the crowd, his voice louder and more desperate. "This doesn't prove anything. People like him always know how to cover their tracks." The room grew quieter, but the tension was suffocating. Malcolm slowly stepped forward, his eyes locked on the groom. "You seem awfully confident for someone who doesn't know who they're accusing," he said, his tone steady yet sharp. But the groom wasn't ready to back down. "And who are you, huh? Some nobody trying to blend in where you don't belong?" Malcolm's lips curled into the faintest of smiles, one that promised this wasn't over yet. "You really have no idea who I am, do you?" Malcolm said, his voice calm but carrying an edge that made the room go still. The groom scoffed, crossing his arms. "Should I? Are you some kind of big shot in your little world?" A small, knowing smile played on Malcolm's lips. "Let's just say, the little world you're mocking is the one that probably built this venue. And your father's company? I've owned a majority share in that for years." The groom froze, his arrogance momentarily slipping into confusion. What are you talking about?" Malcolm stepped closer, his presence commanding the space. "King Enterprises," he said evenly, his gaze unwavering. "You know, the company that secured this venue, funded half the businesses on this block, and, if I'm not mistaken, signed off on the last bailout for your family's floundering investments." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, the weight of Malcolm's words sinking in. The groom stammered, his confidence rapidly unraveling. You're lying," he said weakly, but even he didn't seem convinced. Malcolm didn't flinch. Instead, he reached into his pocket, pulled out a sleek business card, and handed it to the groom. The crowd strained to catch a glimpse of it as the groom's face turned pale. "Malcolm King," he read aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. "CEO, King Enterprises." "That's right," Malcolm said, his tone steady. "And the man you just tried to humiliate in front of your friends and family, he's the one who's been signing the checks that keep your world intact." The groom's hands trembled, the card slipping from his grip as he struggled to find words. But Malcolm wasn't done. His eyes swept over the crowd, landing on the bride, who stood frozen, her face a mix of shock and embarrassment. "The next move you make," Malcolm said, his voice cold and deliberate, "will decide what kind of man you want to be remembered as." The room fell into an uneasy silence, but Malcolm wasn't finished. "Funny how quick you were to accuse me," he said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "But what if we turn the spotlight on you?" The groom flinched, his bravado fading under the weight of Malcolm's gaze. "What are you insinuating?" he snapped, but his voice cracked slightly. Malcolm didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached for his briefcase, pulling out one of the documents the groom had carelessly tossed aside. "This," Malcolm said, holding it up for all to see, "is a ledger, one of many I've reviewed. And do you know what I found? A series of interesting transactions tied to your family's business. Care to explain why funds meant for development mysteriously disappeared?" The groom's face drained of color, and the crowd erupted into murmurs. "You're bluffing," he said weakly, but his voice lacked conviction. Malcolm stepped closer, his presence towering. "Oh, I'm not bluffing," he replied. "In fact, I've been investigating your family's dealings for months. And tonight, your arrogance handed me everything I needed to bring it all into the light." People in the crowd began pulling out their phones, some whispering to each other, others recording the unfolding drama. The bride took a shaky step forward, her voice trembling. "What is he talking about, James?" she asked, her eyes searching her fiancé's face for answers. "I don't know what he's talking about," the groom shouted, panic creeping into his tone. "This is some elaborate setup." Malcolm raised an eyebrow, unbothered by the outburst. "A setup?" he repeated, his voice dripping with calm authority. "Interesting claim. Maybe we should let the authorities decide. After all, I've already forwarded copies of these ledgers to the proper channels." The murmurs turned into gasps as the implication hit home. The groom stumbled back a step, his confidence shattered. You wouldn't dare," he stammered. Malcolm leaned in, his voice low but firm. "I dare, when justice is at stake, and you spent far too long hiding behind privilege and prejudice. Tonight, that ends." "You want to talk about daring?" Malcolm's voice cut through the air, silencing the crowd once more. "Let's make this clear. While you were busy flaunting your entitlement, I made a call." He turned to the entrance just as the doors burst open. Two uniformed police officers strode in, their presence commanding immediate attention. The groom froze, his bravado collapsing entirely. "Wait, what is this?" he sputtered, glancing wildly at the officers. "You can't just barge in here." One of the officers stepped forward holding a document. "James Carter," he said firmly, "we have evidence of financial fraud and embezzlement linked to your family's company. We're here to escort you for questioning." The crowd erupted into shocked murmurs, the groom's face turning an ashen gray. "This is insane," he yelled, backing away. "You can't prove anything." Malcolm calmly stepped forward, locking eyes with the groom. "Oh, but I can," he said, his voice cutting like steel. "You see, I wasn't just here as a guest tonight. I came because I knew your arrogance would expose you. And it did. The missing wallet? Conveniently found in your groomsman's pocket after a quick search." He pointed to one of the groom's closest friends who looked down, red-faced as the crowd turned their scornful eyes toward him. "But that's just the beginning," Malcolm continued, his voice rising. "The ledgers I brought tonight? They're more than enough to launch a full investigation into your operations. You thought accusing me would make you look powerful, but all it did was expose your desperation and your guilt." The groom stumbled, his knees almost giving way as the officers moved closer. "You don't understand," he shouted, his voice cracking. "This is a mistake." Malcolm tilted his head slightly, his expression unrelenting. "No, James. The only mistake was thinking you could wield prejudice like a weapon and walk away unscathed." He turned to the bride, who stood trembling at the edge of the chaos. "I'm sorry you had to see this tonight, but perhaps it's better you know the truth now." The bride's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. As the officers placed cuffs on the groom's wrists, the room erupted in a mix of gasps and silence. Malcolm stood tall, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the chaos he had unraveled. He turned back to the crowd, his final words striking a chord in every heart. "Justice has a way of catching up to those who think they're untouchable. Tonight, we all learned a lesson." As the officers escorted the groom out, the once jubilant wedding hall was steeped in an uneasy silence. Malcolm glanced at the bride, whose tears now streamed freely down her face. She turned away from the scene, her shoulders trembling as she leaned on her maid of honor for support. Malcolm's voice, calm yet firm, broke the quiet. "Sometimes the truth hurts, but it's better to face it than live a lie." He turned to the crowd, his gaze sweeping across their stunned faces. "We all have a choice, whether to judge someone by appearances or to see the substance of their character. Tonight, we witnessed what happens when arrogance and prejudice are left unchecked." He gathered his briefcase, prepared to leave, when a soft voice called out, "Mr. King." It was the bride, her voice shaky but determined. "Thank you for standing up to him." Her words were laced with pain, but also a glimmer of relief, as if a weight had been lifted. Malcolm nodded, offering a small but genuine smile. "Sometimes standing up is the only way to move forward," he said. As Malcolm stepped outside, the cold night air felt refreshing, almost cleansing. He had come here intending to be a quiet observer, but fate had pulled him into the spotlight to reveal the truth. And in doing so, he reminded everyone in that room of a simple yet profound truth. A person's worth isn't defined by the color of their skin or their status in life, but by their integrity, resilience, and actions. The bride later canceled the wedding and publicly distanced herself from the groom's family, while Malcolm's story spread, becoming a powerful reminder that justice and dignity can prevail, even in the face of prejudice. Because in the end, those who act with integrity will always stand taller than those who try to tear others down. This is the Justice Twist, where stories of resilience, integrity, and justice unfold in ways you never saw coming. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories.